Great stuff. Well, look, we might get going because that's how we play at Bradfield. Thank you all so much for being here, particularly Helen and Craig. This is our Bradfield in Conversation, viewing and discussion of the movie Big Deal. Is our democracy for sale? So Craig Reucassel, the director, and Helen Haines, MP for Indi, who was elected in May of 2019, are joining us this evening, and we are delighted to have them here with us. So thank you both for your time. I'm Dr. Samantha Graham, President of Voices of Bradfield, and on behalf of the Executive Committee, most of whom are all here, we're really delighted to have you along with our residents of Bradfield and those from further afield.
It's really, I know she worked hard and everything for it.
And we'll just get people to mute as they come in if they aren't already. Thank you. Two things before we begin. We are recording this for future use, just FYI. So that's in process. And I'd like to hand over to Gillian King, who's part of our team, for the acknowledgement of country. Hi, Gillian.
Thanks, Sam.
Go for it. There we go.
So this meeting is hosted by Voices of Bradfield on the sandstone country of the Darra-Murrugal and Ku-ring-gai clans. They met here for thousands of years to share news, family and culture. At night, they looked up to the familiar skies, and maybe they told the story of the Seven Sisters, shown here in the painting by Gabriella Possum Nuragai. We follow in their footsteps, and we acknowledge and pay respect to the traditional custodians and the elders of the Darra-Murrugal and Ku-ring-gai clans, and the continuation of cultural, spiritual and education practices of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island people. We continue our journey of listening and work towards true kinship and equality under the eternal stars.
Thank you. Thank you so much. An important part of proceedings. Now I'm just going to get There, that should do it. Okay, apologies. I should be better at this by now. We've done it so many times. So just to welcome those of you who are not from Bradfield, I wanted to show you in a more Western model of maps, in addition to the acknowledgement of country where we are. Now, you can all see that, I presume? Bradfield, yes? Great. Okay, give me a thumbs up if you're from Bradfield. Yeah, okay, lots of people waving. Great. And look, you're all familiar by now, I'm sure, with the chat box. If you're not from Bradfield, please throw into the chat box where you're from. We'd love to know where else you've come from. Yeah, people have the thumbs up. Awesome. Great. So yes, where else are you from if you're not from Bradfield? You can see we've got Castle Cove down in the southeast, all the way up to North Turramurra, Wahroonga, all along the train line, Pimble, Kalara, etc. That's who we are. Okay, supporting Bradfield from Mackellar, Bennelong, Epping, North Sydney, Hobart, Casey Electorate, eastern suburbs of Melbourne. Fantastic. Welcome to you all. Thank you for being here. So let me introduce our two guests. We have Craig Reucassel, an Australian writer and comedian who's best known for his work with The Chaser and for going through your bins on the war on waste. He's married with 3 children. He has a cat and I believe a dog that could do with a walk, but maybe this has changed since we've all been where we've been. Big Deal is Craig's directorial debut, and he hopes that it motivates people to become engaged with politics. We do too. Thank you, Craig. And Helen Haines, MP for Indi. Helen has been the MP for Indi since she was elected into the post in May 2019. She grew up on a dairy farm with 4 brothers, which I suspect would come in handy in Canberra. Practiced as a nurse and a midwife, raised 3 children, and lives on a small farm near Wangaratta with her husband Phil, who's an ag scientist. Helen represents about 140,000 people from Falls Creek and the high country in the north down to Kinglake and Melbourne's outskirts in the south. So I'd invite folks who are here for the evening to put questions in the chat, and the team will gather those up. And for the first hour, we'll be having a 3-way conversation and throwing questions that we've pre-planned to Helen and Craig. And then in the last half hour, we'll open up for questions from you. So I have to say, I was struggling with the way into this conversation tonight. And then since it involved all of us watching Craig's big deal over the weekend, I thought I might actually start with getting the emotions that all of you felt as you were watching it over the weekend. People of Bradfield and beyond, what did you feel as you were watching this doco? You can just throw it in the chat there. Anger, yes. Depressed and frustrated. Shock, frustration. Relief and hope, that's good. There we go. Yep, angry, outraged, shocked, galvanized. Good, we like galvanized. Excellent. Yeah, I too. I've just honestly feel so emotional even talking about it. Challenged. Yeah, we are being challenged. Depressed, then inspired. Good. That's what we're after.
That's a good result.
Exactly, Craig. Please, YouTube, just pipe in at any time. Frustrated, angry, and a sense of urgency to get moving. Great presentation of reality. Disappointment. So that's what we've got in the mix tonight. So let's dive in with a stat from the film. Between 55 and 65% of donations to Labor and Liberal parties respectively have unknown sources, and the balance is not reported on until a year later. And over 2 decades, that's $1 billion in dark money going to our political parties. So if we've got that on the one hand, and on the other hand, we know from our kitchen table conversations and surveys, we've got over 600 surveys now, that the people of Bradfield care deeply about climate action, for instance. That's the top priority for the people of Bradfield. How would you say, Craig and Helen, that lack of transparency impacts the things that we care about here in our electorate?
Well, I think given a couple of your top ones were climate and also corruption, then those are some of the major issues that are affected by us. By the way, just in case, if this cuts out, I've got a bit of an internet issue. I've got a spare set up, so I will be back.
Oh, well done.
Yeah.
Thank you,
so I think that's crucial. So I think both of those are right at the heart of this. I mean, one of the main motivations for me wanting to look at this issue was the fact that I'd been looking at doing documentaries on climate change, and the kind of untold part of it was like, well, how can we, it just didn't make sense. Australia's approach doesn't really make sense unless you understand what's going on in Canberra. And that's the frustrating thing. So that was part of the intent of this. So I think it goes to very much the issues you guys are interested in.
I would agree, Craig. And I think integrity is at the heart of this, because integrity is at the heart of political donations. It's at the heart of why we have such an impasse on science-based climate action in this nation. And it doesn't surprise me one jot that the top issues for Bradfield are those 2 things. It certainly was at the heart of the action in Indi almost 10 years ago. So, you know, there's a decade and those issues persist.
Can I just say, by the way, thank you to Helen, because visiting Helen and Indi was the bit that gave a bit of uplifting in that movie. And we were the same. We kind of went on the journey similar in the same way that the movie did, and it was really depressing in the first half or 2/3. You know, when you're in the weeds with Sam Dastiari or something. It was so nice to be able to go Indi and have all these kind of inspiring chats about people getting involved. It was just fantastic. So thank you, Helen and Indi.
Yeah, and what role models you are for us, Kathy McGowan and yourself. So really, really such a gift to be able to draw on your experience. So we know we're not reinventing the wheel. There's a way of doing this that we can follow. I guess a question I wanted to pose was, what do you think are the features of corruption that let it continue?
I mean, the thing about it's not even determined as corruption. Everything we showed in the movie was legal. We didn't show illegality. It's not even defined as corruption. It is literally the legal process in Canberra. And that's part of the problem, is that it's really accepted. You talk to some politicians and they'll be like, they're mystified that we even thought there was anything wrong with it. So, yeah, that's the problem, is at the moment it's even identifying it as a problem, to be honest.
I agree with Craig, and it's why I've campaigned using the language of integrity. I'm really about flipping this around, that if we have a culture of integrity in our parliament, then by virtue of aspiring to that, we have less chance of corruption happening. And I think that is a really important difference when we talk about the New South Wales Anti-Corruption Commission. We get caught up in this notion of what is corruption, when in fact we need to be focusing on what does integrity look like? What does it look like? And it means right at the very beginning that you don't have conflicts of interest if you are in a position of power, if you're an elected member of parliament, let alone a minister in the government. Integrity is something we should be striving for. We need to know what it looks like. I think we've got a pretty good idea now what it doesn't look like. And certainly in the bills that I've put to the federal parliament, there's a very strong element of that, which is around education and research. That gives us data to work with, that gives us case studies to examine, and that starts to paint a picture really for a nation that's never had this at its highest echelons. What does it look like, and how do we make sure we get it? I think that Craig, your movie is really important for drawing the curtains, really pulling back the blinds and having a look at what is actually acceptable practice in this nation, and it doesn't look okay. It looks really awful. That's because it is really awful. So it's not.
We couldn't even pull back all the blinds. Like, there were so many blinds that remained closed to us, and bits that were told to us of, and people wouldn't say on camera as well. Just they're fearful of the blowback from saying it. So that's only unfortunately that's only the curtains partly pulled back.
Yeah, that's right. So again, it's really not until the citizens, who really should be running the show, because the citizens are actually running the show if we choose to step into our power, really, and ask of our politicians that they have integrity, and that we turn up, and that we go to town hall meetings, and that we write to our MPs, and that we go along. We go along to opportunities where we can ask those questions directly, and seek it out, and ultimately vote out those who don't demonstrate it. Yeah.
And can I just say that I think one thing with it is that I don't think everybody in politics is bad or motivated by the wrong ideas. There's actually a lot of people in there who quite go in for the right reasons. And this is why we need to fix this kind of structural underpinning of the institution, because it makes it harder for those who are there for the right reasons to do their job, because they end up, they don't have the same power in the party as the person who's there that can raise a lot of money and can throw it around, and they don't have the same influence that way. So it's like, it will help our whole system. It won't just help, it'll help the major parties as well as independents and otherwise. It'll help the whole system.
Yeah, good point. I was going to come back a little later to education and research in terms of what you both learned about other countries and what they have in place. But I think might be good to just start, Helen, with the Integrity Bill. Can you tell us a little bit about the Australian Federal Integrity Commission Bill 2020? What does it set out to do, and what are its next steps?
Yeah, so I came to the Parliament hoping I wouldn't have to do all that work on writing a piece of legislation to introduce an Integrity Commission, because when I was elected to Parliament, the Prime Minister had promised that the government would in fact be introducing its own legislation, and that we would have an Integrity Commission established. And of course, the opposition said the same thing. So, we walked into the 2019 election campaign with integrity very much on the agenda. very much on the agenda. And of course, we've been disappointed that we haven't seen that legislation introduced by the government. And pretty much from the very first day I arrived, I started making meetings with the then Attorney General to talk about it, to get a clear understanding. I came in good faith, and to ask to be part of the conversation about what the government's model would look like. As we know, there's been many events that have happened over the last almost 2 years, which governments could say that have delayed them in taking this forward. However, after a lot of pressure from myself and others, we continued that conversation of integrity in the House with many motions, many speeches and so on. It became very clear to me that the government really was not going to introduce its own legislation, that the draft plan that Mr. Porter had put out around the time of the election was kind of as much work as they'd done, and that it was probably going to get kicked down the road, maybe have some consultations. So, I've built on the work of others. I've learned that from my scientific training that it's pretty rare that you ever develop anything from scratch. And we've been talking about integrity commission bills, anti-corruption bills in the House for about a decade. So there's already been a lot of work done on it. There was a Greens bill that was in the House. There was my predecessor, Cathy McGowan's bill had been in the House. None of these bills had ever got to the point of debate in the House of Representatives. I worked with those existing bills. I worked with all the recommendations from previous inquiries. I worked with Transparency International, the Accountability Roundtable, AGA Brown from Griffith University, retired judges. And we reiterated the work that had come before, picked up on recommendations, and I made a very concerted effort to talk to every MP and senator who would talk to me about it. Now, lots of them wouldn't talk to me about it, but plenty did. And there were elements of the bill that I finally drafted, which very much picked up on really good thinking from other MPs. And again, I went into this with a motivation that perhaps the only place that an Integrity Commission bill can come from is right through the centre, through the crossbench, where we don't have the government of the day and the opposition really fighting over this, that it could indeed be a consensus bill. The bill ultimately lands in a place where it's extremely robust. It has a broad definition of corruption, picking up on what Craig talked about before, and that makes it very different from the government bill, which really is focusing on criminality. So even for anything to be referred under the government's model, it would need to meet a test of potential criminality, which is not what we're talking about. Well, it may be at its worst instance, but what we're talking about really are those things that I mentioned before: potential conflicts of interest, the misuse of power, systematic corruption over time. So my bill can look retrospectively. That's very important. It has one set of rules for all, which makes it very different to the government's bill, which has a different set of rules for the Australian Federal Police and 8 other agencies, but MPs and senior bureaucrats are treated differently. In my mind, and certainly in the minds of the many academics and judges I've worked with, that's completely unacceptable. And it has the capacity to have public hearings when it's in the interests of the public to do so. And I think the conversations this week about the New South Wales ICAC and the Premier bring this into sharp focus, this notion of being publicly accountable and public hearings. And every time I spoke to an MP, the first thing they'd say to me was, "Oh, we can't have a star chamber. We can't have public hearings. This will politicise the commission." We must have public hearings, but we must be fair about it too. So my bill does give consideration for any person to make their case to the Commissioner about why it may not be fair to have a public hearing at some point in the investigation. It also, importantly, has a clause that enables someone who has been found completely innocent to have that exoneration made very public, and that the report of the Commission must be tabled in the Parliament within a period after the findings are made, and that's put on the public record, that any person who was investigated by the Commission, found to be innocent, is completely exonerated. And that, again, is to make sure that we're not destroying good people and good careers, which is often a criticism of anti-corruption commissions.
Oh, beautiful. That's a great amount of detail in terms of how it would work. Something I noticed on your website was also about debates being shut down in Parliament. And I wondered if you could speak to that, because so many of us have no understanding of what it takes to get a bill through. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, sure, Sam. And gosh, I didn't either. You know, you just heard my biography. I've spent 30 years working in healthcare, you know, I've been engaged in plenty of debates around a patient's bed. And then, you know, when I undertook my PhD, I've been in plenty of debates scientifically. And the idea that you can not debate because you choose not to doesn't really come into it. But in the Parliament, of course, what I learned very rapidly, and yeah, maybe I was very naive to this. I wasn't someone who spent lots of hours watching Parliament, actually, was that, of course, the government holds the agenda. So the government can choose and prioritise the legislation that it wants to get through the House. That's the prerogative of the government. However, what's happened very much in modern Australian parliamentary life, and when I say modern, probably very much the 46th Parliament, is the voices of private members, whether they be opposition members or whether they be the crossbench, or indeed even potentially a government member, the capacity for them to introduce bills in good faith or not, but to introduce legislation into the House, it's extremely difficult. You can put your case to the Speaker. Firstly, you have to have your bill even selected to be introduced in the one time of the week when you can do that, which is generally on a Monday in private members' business. And you can introduce your bill then, and you can make a very nice 15-minute speech, and someone can stand up and second that and also make a fine speech and recommend your bill. And then the Leader of the House will say, we'll adjourn debate until a future day. That future day never comes. So the only opportunity you have then is to try and negotiate with the government to say, could you please put my bill on the agenda for debate? Well, they'll say no, because they're wanting to get their own work done. So the next option is to then do what we call a suspension of standing orders, whereby we stand up and say to the Speaker, I'd like to suspend the usual agenda and call on the Parliament to debate my bill. And you can start speaking about that. All the good reasons. It's an opportunity to roll out your finest rhetoric and say to the House why you should suspend standing orders, because your bill is so important. At that point, the government has a choice. They can let you speak to talk about why your bill should be debated, and sometimes they do. Often, though, mostly they will stand themselves and move that the member no longer be heard, and then that's voted on. So many people may have heard that phrase. So there's a lot of argy-bargy and negotiation goes on. Sometimes the Speaker will let you, move the suspension of standing orders, may even let you then have your mate stand up and second that ask, and then they'll shut you down and say, no, that the members will no longer be heard. But, there'll be a lot of bells ringing and divisions over this, and it's very procedural. But at the end of the day, there's only been, and I may be wrong, somebody could fact check me on this. In the time that I've been an MP, I think there's only been one private members bill that we've actually debated, maybe two. One was on a special day in the year just before the budget, when you're allowed to do, it's a bit like a Harry Potter moment where you can do something like this, something procedural, and it was around a Northern Territory bill. It's very rare to be able to debate your bill if you don't have the numbers in the House, and this is the key. So what we have right now, of course, is 75-75 with the Speaker having the casting vote. So the opportunity to potentially debate a bill is actually stronger than it's ever been. And I put a caveat on that, though. That's if all members are in the House. So with the COVID restrictions, we've had all sorts of comings and goings. And again, it's been procedurally very difficult to debate a bill that's not a government bill. Does that help? Oh,
it's shocking. It is just it sounds so arcane and and insanely subjective and unsystematic. In as much as there's so many variables that come into play.
Yeah, well, you certainly have to understand procedure, and none of this is new. This is part of the Westminster system, that the government of the day holds the cards when it comes to the agenda. But I think we could do politics a bit better than that. We could, I think, mix it up a bit and actually debate. And it's something I one of my campaigns on my integrity bill was a campaign called Bring on Debate. You may not want to vote on the bill. You may not want to, vote for the bill, but at least let us debate it, given that the government had no bill of their own to debate. So, yeah.
Yeah, wow. Okay, thank you so much. In terms of, there's clearly resistance to that particular bill. Just summarise, what's the stated reasons for the length of time it's taking?
Consultation, Sam.
That's it, consultation, okay.
So, the government went through a consultation process from November through to March. We haven't seen any legislation since then, and we've had a change of Attorney General too, of course. And we're running out of time. The election could be called at any moment, and we're absolutely running out of time to even see any potential legislation or the government to bring it into the House and it be debated and voted on and taken to the Senate and so on. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. That's deepened my understanding, and I hope everybody's. Look, Craig, I wanted to ask you about, let's contrast corruption, I'm using that term, and dubious practices, let's say, with good governance on the other hand. Accepted practices that are well known to lead to better, more transparent outcomes for a greater number of people. Apart from Christian's Google Docs instant donations register, which we thought was fabulous. Did you come across, what else did you come across?
Well, it's interesting because there has actually been reform going on at state levels. So, and this is, I think this is a classic example. Like every time you talk to politicians, they say, oh, look, we're going to get around to being instant updates of their donations. It takes a long time. It takes a year, 18 months sometimes, it's so hard. And you go, well, Queensland does it in 7 days. Now, Queensland, the former state of Sir Joe, if this former state of Sir Joe is ahead of you on transparency and corruption issues, then you're really not doing very well. So, their donations have to be updated within 7 days. They've got a much stricter regime where you have to, diarise meetings with politicians and lobbyists, and so you can actually track that. New South Wales has brought in place spending caps as well in terms of how much can be spent by a candidate per seat. So look, there's been a lot of reform that has happened in Australia. Some of it's been knocked down by the High Court, but there's still been some that's happened. And the federal level is just well and truly behind. It's really strange. I mean, it's on climate, it's very far behind. On corruption commissions, it's very far behind. On a lot of these issues, it's just well and truly behind. And it's strange that you have these reforms happening at state level and not happening at the federal level. And we've seen it happen in other countries as well. But, it's happening in Australia. It can happen. It just needs some actual, will to do it. And it's interesting to see somebody in the comments note say, oh, given what Helen's talked about, why would we want an independent representing us? And it's go, well, firstly, without that independent, no one's putting that bill forward. It's not happening at all. And it is interesting that even without, I think one of the good things about these movements and about people becoming more active, and by the way, I'm not a member of Voices of, I'm not telling people to become members of that. If you want to become a member of a Labor Party, a Liberal Party, and actually be active and push that and give them more grassroots, it actually also has some effect there. The problem is at the moment, there's very few people from the electorate actually being involved, and that leaves far more voice for those who are paying for the dinners and sitting down and paying 100 grand for a lunch. So that, we need to strengthen the voice of the community. But without the independence they're pushing for that, firstly, you don't have it. You don't have the conversation about it. And it also, it's interesting recently, I've noticed that there's been a lot of Liberal Party members in the lead up to COP26 being more vocal about climate change issues. And a lot of those are the ones that have active voices of movements in their area. And I think it's because they're scared. It's because they go, oh, we're hearing from our community a lot and they are saying, we really want action on this. I better start talking about it a lot more. Now, whether they're doing anything, we'll see. But, there is a lot that comes from having people active behind an independent that isn't just about passing a bill.
Yeah, I'd love to jump in there, Craig. I think you're absolutely right. And look, the Indi experience, we never set out in Indi to get an independent member of parliament in the first instance. What we set out to do was get our voices heard. And it was on key issues like climate and integrity, and it was around our despair that our member at the time was not in the House when the apology was made to the stolen generations. And, there were lots of reasons why we felt that we weren't being represented in the way that we wished to be, and that we really actively wanted the local MP to listen to us. So, and to hear us. And I think that's, the point that you're making about climate and about various MPs around the nation who may be hearing now a little bit more loudly from their constituents what it is they want. So, that is an extraordinarily powerful outcome. If you, really engage with your democracy, you can make things change, whether that actually changes the person or the party or who is representing you. If it changes the behaviour and it changes decision making at the federal level, that's an extraordinary outcome, and it's one that's in our hands if we get involved.
Yes, well said. If we get involved, the question that arises for us quite often is, well, if I have a liberal, a moderate liberal in MP. If I work hard to replace them with an independent, doesn't that just push the party further to the right? And the question that we can counterpose is, well, are they really moderate? Because basically, even if my MP or the MP next door is saying, I understand climate is an issue, and I'm going to do everything I can to change the party's mind on how it votes, people are voting in blocks. That's how it works. They vote in blocks. So actually, my MP, the MP north of us, east, south, west, they're voting the same way that Craig Kelly votes. So I think a lot of people don't understand. They feel like there is an ability for your MP to go and represent you back in Canberra, but actually, regardless of what they say to you when they're doing their coffee mornings or whatever, when they go back and vote, it's a different story. So we have to, maybe you can speak a little bit to that about checking one's voting record as opposed to what one says one will do.
Yeah, I guess it depends. Can they effectively change Barnaby Joyce's mind on climate? And it's interesting, to be fair as well. It's not just the coalition. If you think about it, Labor's actual action on climate change, its biggest steps about it, came at a time when it was part of a minority, and it required the support of the Greens and the Independents. And the Greens and the Independents pushed Labor towards, legislation that actually made a difference there. So in both ways, you say, well, does a moderate Liberal or a moderate Labor or whatever going to make a difference? I guess in the end, if you can replace it, and they need to call on the support of independents who believe in climate change, or the Greens or others, it's more likely to then have an impact on their actual votes.
Yeah, I think that's very true. That's the evidence, really, Craig, isn't it? That's exactly what we saw. I think that this notion of how people vote is really, of course, really important. I would say to people, have a little bit of caution on that. There's a particular website, I think, called How They Vote. You need to vote for you. They vote for you.
Yes, well said.
A little bit of caution in that, in the interpretation of it. And one of the things you need to be really, I think, analytical about is breaking that down into what are substantive motions. What are substantive bills, actual bills, and what are motions in the House. And I can tell you as an independent, every vote I make has to be a considered vote, whether it's a motion or a substantive bill, or whether it be an amendment. And often when I walk into the House, my friends on both sides of the aisle will say to me, Helen, what is it we're voting on right now? Because, when the bells ring, in fairness though, the bells ring and you come in there and you may have been in another meeting or somewhere else around the House doing something, and you're trying to keep track of what's going on in the chamber. Ultimately, though, I need to know, because I need to make a decision. And, I often say to them, it's really easy to cross the floor. I do it several times a day. I'm trying to make a decision on what's going on. But I guess just about that, how they vote for you, is that sometimes there'll be things that don't quite make sense. And it may be, if you look carefully at it, that that particular MP is voting no on a motion, and it's not until you actually read the motion you might think, oh, why wouldn't they have voted yes on that? But you'll read it, there may be some pretty spicy bits of rhetoric at the bottom of that motion, which are purely political. It's purely performative politics in the House, and I certainly know as an independent, I try not to play in that mud pit too often. And if a motion is one that really makes sense and has a solution and is something that offers a way forward in the House, I will vote for it. If it's purely a mudslinging exercise, even though there might be 3 or 4 good points in the motion, I often won't vote for it because, again, I'm trying to demonstrate that we need to do politics better than that. We need to put forward ideas that can be debated and can work and can bring the nation along. I get it. Of course, there has to be, some of that stuff, some of that rhetoric, some of that muscular stuff, but I don't think it really helps us progress anywhere. So I would say to people, have a good look at what that website's telling you. It's not always the full story.
I think that's a great point. And in fact, we figured that out at Voices of Bradfield. And so our secretary, who's got this massive brain for statistical analysis and data analysis, he uses it as a starting point, and then we dive in and he's actually doing a deeper analysis of, well, what are the nuances in what was voted yes and for and against. So yeah, good point. Look, we've got a question here to Craig. When you were interviewing lobbying folks, did you have a sense that individual morals and ethics were out of whack with usual community sentiment? The notion of paying $100,000 for access to create outcomes, was that considered wrong, or would they carry on regardless?
Yeah, I saw that story. Look, it was considered the norm, and that's the thing. It wasn't considered an outrage. It was just considered business, how it's done. The only person that I spoke to who I think is the opposite was probably, you might have heard recently of Climate 200, which is Simon Holmes, the court raising money to support independents and others who support climate. And his perspective was, I don't want to have to be doing this. It'd be great if they fixed the rules so that I didn't have to be. It's like at the moment, the problem is that the structure at the moment is so biased and wrong that to play in that structure, you're going to go, well, yes, we want to reform it, but we've also got to compete in it at the moment. So that's kind of the only person. Generally speaking, it was kind of seen as the norm. That said, I didn't, there was kind of long research process before filming this. And as I said, not everyone will go on camera with their perspectives. I did have people from, for instance, Labor who said, look, if we came up with a proper system whereby we got rid of corporate, donations, we'd have to get rid of union donations as well. If it was done in a fair way, then that's a better way forward, So there's definitely people there that are open to this. And I think that's actually, again, it's one of the interesting things about, I found it fascinating after doing the War on Waste documentary, because what you'd find is that in a company, there'd be, the sustainability person that's been working away in this company for years and never been listened to. And after War on Waste, they go, CEO finally invited me in and we got to do something. You realize there's these battles going on. I think what you need in politics at the moment is even within the major parties, there's a battle going on between those who do want to reform and those that don't. And again, that's where that push from the community, if people in Parliament start realizing that this is a matter that really matters to a lot of people in their community, they will start, the ones that are, on the right side will start having more power to actually achieve that change. And it's interesting, there was a question came later about going, well, if my independent can't win, is there any point backing them? It's like, well, yeah, it's still important for you to be talking up about the issues you care about. And it is actually easier, politicians do listen. You can write to them, you can call them up and that kind of thing. They do listen. But also, if you're contacting them and saying, hey, we represent 1,000 people on our electorate, that's going to have more power than you just making your call on your own. So a movement like Voices Of, even if it's not running a candidate, is a really important thing because it does, it's a loud hailer. It's a loud hailer for the voice of the community. So yeah, keep it up, even if you're not going to win.
Yeah, look, did you want to add something there, Helen?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, we have a preferential voting system, and I think part of the work of voices groups is an education piece to electors too, to understand how that works, and that your favourite candidate may not get up, your number one, but be careful who you put 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or whatever. A lot of people don't understand that. I'm sure many people on this call do. But we did an enormous amount of work in Indi in talking to everyday people who don't generally pay that much attention to politics, turn up on polling day, of course, and, may have their favourite candidate but don't think twice about what their preference is going to be, or indeed follow the ticket. And that's had, I think, a very significant impact in Indi, and that many people now think about that. And there's no question that in a preferential voting system, if you've got people who think, well, you know what, I'm a rusted-on Labor voter, and I'm going to vote number one for the Labor Party, but, I don't mind Helen Haines. She seems like a, reasonable person, and I've met her a couple of times. And so maybe I won't follow the Labor Party card. Maybe I'll put Helen number two because you're telling me she's pretty good, and before you know it, you start building up your preferences. Now, obviously, you've got to get in the top two for that preference to flow to your candidate. But even if your candidate, if you were to put up an independent, wasn't successful, you can change what's happening in your electorate by educating people about preferencing.
Look, to that point, if anybody out there knows an animator, there's this beautiful little animation we've designed to really clearly show how those preferences work, how they flow, because it's just not something that we're taught at school. I certainly wasn't. We had that trip to Canberra that Craig talks about in the doco, but understanding preferences. So if anybody knows an animator out there or wants to fund a small little animation that says this is how this is why your preferences are important, that's a great that would be a real benefit, and we'd share that with the whole Voices community probably. However, we are all independent and doing our own thing, which sometimes we're seen as not. But as you can tell, most people on this call are from Bradfield, and we have been slowly but steadily gathering numbers. We've got a lovely, strong team of 6 to 8 of us, and on top of that, we've picked up about 50 plus volunteers who have been walking the streets of Bradfield with leaflets. We've got the T-shirts. All of that is underway. So we'd really love you to join us. On that note, Helen, we're curious how at your stage of this, how do you involve your community now that you're there in terms of reviewing legislation, influencing policy? What are the mechanisms by which you do that?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. It's a great question. So I do what most MPs do. I have online and hard copy newsletters. I send out lots of emails and things like that. But in my fortnightly electronic newsletter, for example, once we're coming into a sitting period, I flag on that and through my social media channels more broadly what bills will be debated. And I ask people for their views on those bills. I then circle back to people when I'm finished that parliamentary sitting, how I did vote. I have links to the speeches that I made on those bills, and it's routine for me that if I'm going to oppose a government bill that I always make a speech about why, because I think it's important for my voters to know why I would be opposing the government on a piece of legislation that they may be putting forward as the government. So I always do that. I get lots of really interesting comments from people when I ask them for their views on particular bills. The other thing, of course, is that many people who are really engaged in some of the big name bills that are coming up, who, something like the EPBC Act, for example, I get a lot of correspondence about that with people telling me what they really think I should do.
Wait, you might translate that for people, the EPBC?
Yeah, that's the Environmental Protection Bill that has had a lot of debate, is still in the Senate being debated over there. But, people feel passionate about some things, and some bills get a lot of publicity, but there's plenty of others that don't. So I just try to do an educative piece about what we are about to debate and what the key elements of that are. I guess like everyone, of course, COVID changed the way that I may be communicating with and trying to get that grassroots perspective into what I'm doing. So one of the key things that Indi has put forward by way of positive contribution to the climate debate is to recognise the role of renewable energy in rural and regional Australia and to work with community energy. Right around the nation, there's about 100 or more now community energy groups whereby local people create or benefit or share energy in a way that's, that benefits the local community. In Indi, we've got 5 of these groups. And when I was running for Parliament, I met with many of them. They told me about the many blocks that hold them back in doing the work that they want to do. So when I was elected to become the MP, I decided to do a co-design piece with my community around how we could form policy on this to make a difference. So again, in the long dark days of last COVID winter, I put out a discussion paper to the nation. I got 100 submissions into that paper from around the nation. I got 15 local people plus a few outside the electorate as an expert panel. We worked with those discussion papers. We drafted a comprehensive piece of policy called the Local Power Plan. And from that, I then introduced a piece of legislation into the House that would enable that policy to come to life. I had a group of people from Indi were in the House that day up in the gallery. People who'd contributed to that policy were there while that speech was made in the House. They then joined me for a press conference and they spoke at that press conference. So they were completely a part of that legislation. We then had that bill sent off to the Energy and Environment Committee, so the parliamentary committee, to examine that bill. And again, all of these people, hundreds of them, got involved then to put submissions into that parliamentary process. We had over 1,000 submissions into that. And we had a day of public hearings where, again, many, many local people who contributed to the policy, plus many others outside of the policy, gave witness in that committee. So I guess that's a living, breathing, very tangible way that the community working with their Member of Parliament, not just to be represented in terms of the votes on other people's policies, but to actually design and introduce policy to the Parliament themselves.
That's phenomenal. Is that unusual globally? Like, are there other countries where that's just normal?
I don't know. It's very normal for us in Indi to take that approach.
Yeah.
I don't know how common it is, but it's I come from part of my background is a research background, and I worked with people that way in co-designed research projects. So again, it was a methodology that I was familiar with. But it's a very powerful way to work with the people you represent and for them to be absolutely head and shoulders right in there on doing something tangible, positive, coming with solutions to the Parliament. And that's what we really wanted to do around climate. I really didn't want to get in the corners on what's been such a terribly long and hopeless debate. I really wanted to come with something. And again, I represent rural and regional Australia, so a very different voice to perhaps what the National Party might say about climate. But again, coming on the front foot with something that would benefit rural and regional Australia.
Yes, yes. Craig, did you want to add anything there?
No, just to say, as we said in the movie, it's interesting, isn't it, that independents from the country pushing for climate change legislation when the Nationals don't necessarily do that, despite the fact that farmers are probably the most affected by the effects of climate change. And that makes you go, why is it that they don't do that? And again,
yeah. Oh, wow. Well, that's exciting to just to hear the processes that you've been using. That co-design is so rich as it engages while educating, and yeah, I hope we get to that stage. Craig, coming back to you, what were the key moments or things that you saw that catalyzed your determination to do the documentary?
Yeah, as I said, look, I've been interested in this topic for a long time, but it's became more kind of important, I think, when I was really, I did 2 climate change documentaries, and you really, really do get to the point where you go, Australia its policy doesn't make sense, particularly in terms of the impact on Australia.
Yeah.
Like Australia it's really hammered by climate change. We're already seeing the effects. We're already 1.4 degrees in Australia. And so it just, we seem so retrograde, we seem so backwards. And so
Mhm.
that really is one of those issues I really want to look at. I mean, I think things like as well, gambling, like the gambling policy in Australia. And unfortunately, COVID, we weren't able to get to Tasmania, but Tasmania is a really interesting example of where they are the one state that still has the federal laws in terms of donations and influence. And down there, I mean, they've just forfeited. They've given away, you know, Tasmania is not a rich state. It's a state where we saw people living on football fields in the middle of winter because there wasn't enough housing. And yet they were foregoing millions of dollars every year in potential revenue because of their kind of the way their gambling was set up. And you just kind of go, it's ridiculous. And the problem is this is always done in such a complex way that people don't really, it's hard to draw the link, isn't it? You kind of go, I don't recognize that part of me sleeping on this bloody in the being freezing and not having proper housing is because of the way that our policy has been made and the way that people have far greater influence in policy making than others. So it's that imbalance that really made me kind of, it's the injustice of it that I guess makes me frustrated and angry and want to do something about it.
Which taps us back into those emotions at the start. So injustice and also just embarrassment. I think we're starting to pick up, you know, we're travelers, we're a nation of travelers, and having it reflected back to us from overseas, particularly with COP26 about to happen in Glasgow, it feels like possibly that emotion of embarrassment, and if shame might be a bit too strong, that the way we're running the country is you use the word retrograde, I think. So I guess I'm inviting the crew here to tap into what is it that you're feeling about what's going on. And we talked about it a little bit at the start, but if that's a catalyst to get you to make an awesome documentary, or for you, Helen, what was it that, were there a couple of things where you just said, right, I've got to put my hand up? She's just coming off mute, folks.
Yeah. There we go. Well, first,
you.
I just want to make comment on Craig's last comment about gambling and who's the champion in the Parliament about that? Andrew Wilkie, independent member, Tasmanian. If Andrew's voice wasn't there, I don't think anybody's would have been. And who really was the person that pushed and pushed and pushed until we saw the investigation into Crown Casino. Andrew Wilkie, independent member, was there pushing for that. So, the impact, again, that an independent can have on changing the shape of the conversation, really important. For me, look, I'll say at the outset, no one's more surprised than me that I'm a member of Parliament. This was absolutely not in my life plan. It really wasn't. And sometimes I do wake up in the morning and think, what's a nice girl like you doing in a place like this? But I am because I really care, just like I know so many people do. And in Indi, almost 10 years ago, when a small group of people got together to have a conversation who wanted to channel their frustration into something else, that's really contagious. And when that first started, I was kind of busy doing other stuff, and I was looking at it thinking, good on you. And members of my family were very engaged with it. And I really didn't think they had a snowflake's chance in hell. But it's contagious. Once you start seeing people putting their frustration, their sadness, their anger into something that catches on and becomes a movement, it's really energizing. And I got very energized by what we achieved in Indi in 2013. I was doing things that I had never done before. Like, I'd never before stood on a polling booth and handed out how to vote cards. I had never door knocked. God knows. I was the first to say I'm not going to be door knocking. Then I went door knocking and thought, what's actually quite fun? And it's fun when you do it with other people. And it's really fun when you go into this political realm with a very clear set of values and a really clear code of behaviour, that you're not going to get into this game of saying really horrible stuff, and that you're not going to come in full of negativity, that you're going to put forward a positive story, you're going to come with solutions, not complaints. So that's a nice place to operate. And yeah, I mean, that was contagious. And then, I did a little bit of volunteering for Kathy when she was elected, went up to Canberra. So my apprenticeship was 4 days as a volunteer in Canberra. But again, I never thought it would be me being the Member of Parliament. I thought it was all a jolly lark. And it was terrific to be involved, and how fantastic to have a Member of Parliament like Kathy. And it wasn't really until Kathy, determined that she would be retiring. And, deep down, I'm a kind of competitive person. And the idea that we would just hand Indy back to the major parties without putting forward another candidate, we can't do that. I spent a lot of time asking other people to run. And over our dinner table, I'd often say to my husband, have you found anybody yet? And then, like what happens at many meetings, many of you people on the line will know this. Sometimes, you're looking at the floor and you look up at a particular moment and everybody's looking at you. And before you know it, you're secretary of the blooming footy club. So anyway, yeah. But again, we had a process in Indi inviting people to come forward, and we've had a deliberative forum, as you probably know, to ultimately, for the community, those that could fit in that particular hall on that very stinking hot day, to invite someone to stand. And, I guess for me, once I'd been convinced that I should at least consider this, the minute I walked into that hall, I knew that if the community did invite me to be their candidate, that, I was 100% in, 100% in. And boy, I've been 100% in ever since. And can I say to any of you out there who are listening and maybe thinking maybe I could run as an independent with the backing of a big, wonderful community, then, being scared is not an excuse not to do it, because I got to say, I was absolutely terrified. I have never been so frightened in all my life as I was in that campaign. And I felt, gee whiz, I don't think, I haven't got all the skills that perhaps I need, but the reality is, what skill set do you need to be a Member of Parliament? You need to be a decent and honest person front up, and most people are, really, they are, most people who run for Parliament. So, but then you need to have a lot of courage, and, you need to have people behind you who will help you. And I've got so many people who are behind me and help me, in Indy, and I often say, I may be an independent, but I never walk alone.
Beautiful. Oh my goodness, that's so inspiring. And you led me right to the next question, which was actually, what are the qualities that you need to be a candidate? And we did come down to smart, female, and blonde, just going on you and Zali, and then Kylie Tink has just put herself forward, and but that's not what we're saying. The competitiveness seems quite important, because Zali, there she was as a Olympic athlete. You've talked about it, and the four brothers comment I made earlier. Say a little bit more about what's it take to show up and be courageous enough. And yeah, who are we looking for? Because we are in that stage with Voices of Bradfield where we've put the call out for candidates. Yeah,
well, you've got to want to win. This is not a dress rehearsal. If you're going to put your hand up to run for Parliament, and particularly if you're going to run as an independent against a formidable opponent in an electorate, you've got to want to do it. You've really got to want to win, because it's a massive undertaking. I can't over explain it, I suppose, that that whole process of getting out on the hustings, as we say, talking to people, is exhausting. We have lots of town hall meetings in Indi where you need to, all the candidates stand up and take questions from the floor. It can be, it's pretty full on, and I'm a massive kind of over preparer, and I would be pacing the floor before every one of these, and never underestimate who's in an audience. I could go to the smallest tiny little country hall, and I would take questions on everything from nuclear arms, China, to water policy, to why is the local road still full of potholes? You've got to be prepared to answer anything and everything, no question, the old politic of major parties, that comes into play, and there's some pretty tough stuff gets said, and you know, if again you're not used to it, which I wasn't, you've got to navigate all of that too. But, you know, again, I think if you've got a great movement of people behind you, there's, you know, they do a lot of the work, you know, in that, you know, when there's nasty stuff potentially written in a letter to the editor, before you put the paper down, there's somebody out there writing a response, you know. So I think it's about harnessing that, and again, it's about you can be really competitive, and you must be, but again, be the change you want to see. Make sure that in every encounter that you have, that you don't go down that awful rabbit hole of negativity and ugly politics, and it is contagious. People will engage with you, I think, if they're not having to play those games. So yep, you've definitely got to win, and lots of people say you need to have thick skin, and yeah, growing up with 4 brothers was certainly a helpful part of my life, no question. And you know, I grew up on a farm, so I've let's say I've rolled in plenty of dirty stuff in my life, literally. So I'm no shrinking pedal, but I would say, you know, that some of this stuff is pretty hard. You know, it is hard, and you do feel it. And again, you need to have people there to support you and talk it out with. Yeah. But I'll give you one example. You know, I was at a town hall meeting in Mansfield, which is a beautiful mountain village in my electorate. And the people of Mansfield are really engaged in their politics, and they have terrific town halls every time there's an election on, and the hall is always filled. The week prior to the Mansfield town hall, I'd been at another town hall meeting, and one of the major parties had sent along some pretty questionable dudes whose job it was to sit in the front row and really intimidate me. And honestly, it really did freak me out. It was horrible. You know, I came home and I needed a brandy. And anyway, my husband put the word out to our whole kind of community network, and they said, look, Helen was totally freaked out tonight. It's really knocked her for 6. Well, at the Mansfield Town Hall, a whole lot of young people from my community, they got there early and they occupied the first 3 rows. And those dudes turned up again and they had to sit in the back row. So, you know, that gives you courage, doesn't it?
What a great example of the community responding at a time of need. Perfect. Really fantastic. Oh, my goodness. Look, I'm about to open it up to questions. There was just one thing I wanted to come back to, and Craig, it was a quote at the end of no, it wasn't at the end, it was where now let me see, the Sydney community guy is talking about don't
David
think we
Barrow.
have David Barrow, amazing organization he heads up.
Yeah, and I think the main, are you talking about when he said, you know, in a sense, don't just become cynical about politics, because if you become cynical and you step out of it, it's exactly what those in power want to do. You know, the people that
They have succeeded.
They win by doing that. Your cynicism has to make you be active and involved rather than actually make you pull out of it, because otherwise, yeah, there's no point.
And the look on Christian's face when he kind of got, like, he thought he'd uncovered, oh, it's so messy, it's dirty, it's blackmail, it's bribery. But then David turns it around and goes, you know, that's what they want you to think. You're thinking what they want you to think. Think above that, or, you know, take it to another level.
Absolutely. And I think for both Christian and myself that day, there was quite a penny drop moment going, yeah, you're right. You know, we need to remain active in our democracy. Essentially, your cynicism can be right to a point, but it's got to channel towards trying to improve the democracy. And look, I don't want people to come out of this movie with the perspective that Australia's democracy is totally terrible. There's some good things there. There are some bits, you know, we've got a good electoral commission that sets up fair boundaries and that kind of stuff. You know, there's good stuff there. We just need to fix a few more things, because we can't be complacent, essentially. We've got to make sure we keep improving it so that we have a great democracy, because this is a great country and we want to keep it that way. So yeah, it's not about throwing out the baby with the bathwater. We've really got to stay engaged and just improve.
Yeah, well said. So I had a question come in earlier. How do we learn more about lobby groups? How they're established? What do they look like? How they're funded? What do you suggest?
That's a good question. They don't tend to try and publicise themselves enormously. There's some great writing. There's some great articles in the Guardian. Did a kind of series on lobbying and that, which is you can look into there. There is a lobbyist register. There's a register of lobbying firms, but again, it's typical approach of the rules in Australia. It's extremely flawed. So lobbying company of lobbyists has to register. But if I'm the government relations lobbyist for a different company and I go to Canberra, I don't have to register. Or if I'm there's so many more lobbyists in Canberra that don't call themselves lobbyists. So it's kind of extremely hard to actually keep up. I mean, even trying to count them was just, we got lost. so many thousands of them. So
That's
yeah,
telling.
Exactly. And look, and to be fair, I don't think that there's never going to be lobby. You're not going to get rid of every lobbyist, right? So firstly, it's about transparency, about knowing who your ministers are meeting with. Secondly, it's about making that relationship an even one. Now, all of us have been involved in COVID, and we might be in an industry whereby somebody from our industry has gone down to Canberra to try and say, look, hang on a second, these rules don't really work for us. We can't, it doesn't work for our members. We need to have it more fair or whatever. That's not a bad thing to have somebody who's lobbying on your behalf and saying, you don't understand. People in Parliament don't understand what everyone's doing. That's not necessarily bad. But what's wrong though is if that lobbyist is sitting down opposite the table and there's a financial relationship there, there's a kind of like well, if you don't listen to me, there's that $100,000 gone. You need that to run for your campaign, and there's no caps on donations in Australia. So if I move my money to the other party, who's the major party, then what's going to happen there? You're going to lose that arms race. The dialogue's got to happen in a really fair way, and that's not necessarily happening when you've got this money clouding it.
Yeah, great. That's clear. I was intrigued by that appeal to reciprocity, or the psychology of having to pay the beer back, as a concept.
It's fascinating. It's like, everyone else in the country is affected by somebody who gives them a large amount of money. Yeah. Apparently, politicians are in no way, despite the fact that they require that money to run their campaign. It's interesting because earlier, Helen, we mentioned Andrew Wilkie is another interesting example. As almost now the safest seat in the country, doesn't spend almost anything on campaigning. He says, he spends a little bit of money, he spends below the amount of money you get for public funding. He says, I find if I really just look after the community during the years that I'm there, I don't need to spend much money when it comes to election. You kind of go, isn't that interesting? Because there's kind of two models. You go, if you don't have a model, your model is I have to raise a lot of money to run ads and do all this kind of stuff around election time and just smash people with all this information and try and get their vote. But the other approach is if you don't have all that money, you go, well, I just have to really take care of my community and be in touch with them for 3 years. You go, isn't that what a bloody member's meant to do? Isn't that the very point of it? And that's, again, the thing about it's taking out that influence of that money. It's not the only thing. It's also revolving doors and all those kind of things. But taking out those influences makes it more likely that your local member is going to have to rely on being a really good local member.
Yeah. Well said. Great example.
Liberal or whatever.
Oh yeah, don't start on the revolving doors. I'm just curious where John Barilaro is going to be working by next week. Yeah.
You be careful, you have a fixated persons unit tracking you down.
Yeah, that's right. Careful indeed. Look, I've got a question here to Helen. Can you please give any suggestions on how to attract a Polly's attention with a letter or email? We only ever get a form response. Are they listening?
Yeah, I get around 3,000 emails a month, in addition to what we call campaign emails, which are kind of form emails that a group may put together to lobby an MP about something. I do answer every email. Now, I can't give a personalised response to 3,000 emails. So if people are writing to me about a national topic, and lots of people are writing to me about that, then what we do is we get a selection of those emails and pull out the key questions that people are seeking answers to. and do quite a bit of research on that topic, and I discuss it with my policy advisors, and then we formulate a response that we send to many people who are writing on that issue. So maybe that's why that it may sound like a very formulaic response. I tried not to make it sound too formulaic, but, I get people write back to me saying, no, that's not what I want more, or I want something else on that. I do my best. I think I have to, particularly as an independent, I have to work out what issues I'm going to die in the ditch over. And, there's only 100% of time in any day. So I think it really pays, if you seriously want to engage with your MP, then write a personal email rather than maybe just hit the Action Network reply button. And you'll get a genuine response, or you should. And I would say my responses are genuine, those ones. They're just not highly personal because of the volume on a particular topic. The respect at work issue, super important to me, massive issue. I had over 2,000 emails in a week on that, and it was the campaign. And you simply can't write a personalised response to every one of those. If you want to really engage with your MP, write a respectful email outlining the issue that you're concerned about. Ask if you can make an appointment to talk to your MP. That might be a telephone appointment or a face-to-face appointment. I have a policy that if people wish to meet me, I try to do so. I really do. And even if it's on an issue that I know I can't solve, I think that people have the right to meet their Member of Parliament. So ask for a meeting. And again, come with solutions. That's so helpful. It's easy to come with a shopping list of complaints, but come with ideas and solutions, and ask how you can get involved. Ask what it would take to move their thinking, if you think if you need to move their thinking. Yeah, that's what I'd suggest.
Thank you, Helen. Just going back to the data, the equations in the doco, Craig, the 1,000 petition signatures is worth one letter. The 1,000 letters is worth one phone call. And 100 phone calls is worth one face-to-face meeting. I have to say, personally, I gave up letter writing as an individual. I just felt, just for the reasons you just outlined, Helen. For me, it's much more valuable to be part of a community where we have a louder voice that we can collectively address some of the issues. So I just wanted to add that in. Yeah, go on.
We're speaking on behalf of, if you've had voices for Bradfield or whatever, and you say we've polled thousands of people and had all these conversations, that's going to have more power. Although I would say, I had a friend that worked in a political office, and he said that, a written letter actually does have a bit of an impact, because there's an effort involved, and also they presume, and this is the same for corporations too, if you get a letter, you presume there's many more people out there who have the same problem, but just haven't bothered to sit down and watch it. So, I wouldn't say there's no value to it.
Yeah, 1,000.
Yeah.
But I think it is worth knowing just how much correspondence does come into an MP's office. It's enormous, absolutely enormous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, got you. Questions, folks? Do you want to? We've got about 15 minutes left. We've posed some of your questions. What else would you like to know from Helen and Craig?
It's pretty easy so far, Craig, hey?
Yeah, well, let's say there's one from Neil McIntyre here. The Irish Lobbying Register, has that shown to be beneficial to the health of Irish democracy since it was set up? The people we spoke to seem to think it had cleaned it up a bit. I mean, I'm not saying that any democracy's got this perfect yet, but it's interesting that Ireland came into it for a similar reason as Australia. A lot of our reforms have come off the back of property investment scandals, and Ireland's was a kind of link to that as well. And they've definitely, they've massively reduced the influence of lobbying and made it much more transparent over there. And the same has happened in Canada. Canada's done similar things as well. So there are a lot of countries that are trying to deal with this at the moment. So hopefully Australia will be one of the ones that also gets on board. Helen's done, as she said, she's done all the hard work. She's written the bill.
Yes. With the help of how many staff, Helen? There's questions just come in about the number of staff.
Yeah. So as an independent member of parliament, we're well staffed. I mean, full credit to the government of the day, actually, because it's up to the government of the day to determine how many staff you will have as an independent member of parliament. So I have a large rural electorate, which means that I have 2 offices in the electorate. It's 120,000 square kilometres. So each of those offices is staffed by a couple of what we call electorate officers. So they're the really extraordinary frontline workers who are taking the phone calls, logging cases, responding to emails, and problem solving for constituents. So I have 5 of those people working for me, and I have 4 people who work with me in what we call an advisor role. So a media advisor. Well, you can choose how you set it up. So the way I've chosen is to have someone with expertise in media and communications, someone with expertise in parliamentary work, parliamentary processes, writing bills, for example, understanding how the whole place works, navigating the House, doing all of that work in Parliament. A policy advisor who's a very skilled researcher with a public policy background. And then I have a chief of staff who looks after the whole kind of operations of this. And I have 1,700 volunteers.
Yeah, sensational.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's a great team. Again, I would say to anybody listening who's, thinking about, what would it be like to be an independent member of parliament? Well, the reality is that you don't have the resources of a major party. Of course you don't. And that's why I said before, you've only got 100% of time. So you need to divide it in a way that's going to have impact and that responds to what your community wants you to do. So while there might be, masses of fantastically important issues and Craig brought up gambling before, and that's something I feel very passionate about, but I don't do any work on it. Because I don't have time to. Andrew Wilkie is doing a lot of good work on that, and I would back him in. So I've been pretty strategic about the issues that I can devote a lot of resources and time to. And the key thing for me is to be a really responsive local member. And my electorate got slammed during the Black Summer bushfires, and I have a border community, so they've been under enormous stress and pressure, sandwiched between the 2 most populous states. And I have people with very low incomes. I have people in my electorate. The level of tertiary education, my electorate is much lower than the state average. So we've got lots of issues that need solving, lots of infrastructure problems that need addressing. I've got plenty of work to do. So again, I have to structure my responses to thousands of other things in a way that makes sense to the people I represent.
Yeah, right. Look, a question here. Can we do anything with our local MP to support your integrity bill?
Yeah, you can write to him and say, Helen Haines has got an excellent piece of legislation that's been lauded by the legal experts that is something that she's brought forward in good faith. Perhaps you should, as a member of the cabinet, get behind her and allow it to be debated. That'd be a great thing to say. Yeah. Again, just debate it and then pull it apart, improve it, amend it. Quite possibly, why not? Isn't that what the Parliament's for?
Yeah, well done. Thank you. That's for you, Victor. How can Clive Palmer funding the United Australia Party be stopped? It's so unfair.
Oh, Craig, that one's for you.
Well, this is what comes back to the whole idea of, I think having caps on spending is really an important part of it. There's no one thing that needs to be done to fix this. It's kind of a swathe of rules, but having caps on spending is really important because at the moment we don't have them. So Clive Palmer can just have such a ridiculously huge impact on it. I mean, you had Malcolm Turnbull in a documentary talking about the fact, Malcolm Turnbull, who's as rich as he is talking about the extent to which, Clive Palmer can have a ridiculous effect on it. That's the problem. I mean, you just need to even it up. It needs to be caps on donations. There needs to be caps on spending so it doesn't become an arms race. And so you can't have one person that just comes in there and massively, imbalances our democracy. I mean, that takes out that kind of fundamental premise of democracy is one person, one vote. And if you have somebody who can put $80 million in there, who can spam everyone's phone across the country, that is an imbalanced system. And that's what we have at the moment. And I find it interesting that political parties tend to set up the rules so that they can't get in trouble. And so they've set it up so that, there's privacy laws for everyone else, but we can get everyone's text message number. There's rules for misleading and deceptive conduct for all businesses, but there aren't for politicians. And I think that seeing Craig Kelly and right now Clive Palmer's abuse of those rules makes me think hopefully someone will go, okay, we finally got to actually tighten these rules up.
Gosh, it's there's no other way around it. And just with the election looming, and we're starting to see rustling from that corner of things again. It's terrifying. On that, with the election coming up, a little later than we thought potentially, it's sort of been moving around in terms of what the bookies are saying. Is there really a feeling in the Bradfield electorate that a change is needed? It's such a rusted on Liberal seat. And I would say, yes, there is. We need more of us on the ground talking to people who are disturbed by what they see in terms of lack of representation, despite the rhetoric in the electorate. Once our representative goes to Canberra, things are quite different. And just on so many issues, the survey has shown us that we are deeply concerned, and we've been crunching the data because we ask in the survey. I'll just show you where the survey is. We ask in the survey for you to identify whether you here it is, how you normally vote, and so then we can see who. Can you see the? You can see the website there, I hope?
Yep.
Yeah, great. So the survey's top right up there, and then we're asking people who they normally vote for, and then we can look at the data and see what's most concerning them. And it's a yes, we're seeing people want change, and we need more people to have this conversation with us and ask them and just listen. Our kitchen table conversations got put on hold pretty quickly because of COVID. We did manage to do quite a number of rounds, and I have a couple of socials, and then kaboom, we were gone and we were back online doing surveys and KTCs online. But I guess unless there are any more burning questions, I'll wrap up shortly and just
I've got a
say,
burning question, Samantha. Is that
yes.
in Bradfield? Is that picture in Bradfield? You got to tell me where it is. It looks beautiful. I need to go there.
Oh wait, which picture? Oh no, which screen am I showing you?
You're just showing us your. No, it's not terrible. Don't worry. It's just people swimming in a beautiful. I think it's your background.
Oh my gosh, my background! I can't see what I'm showing you.
It's not terrible. Sorry.
That's seriously funny. That is very funny. I like that. That's
like
my favorite photo. One of my girlfriends. Yes, it's in Sydney. One of my girlfriends is on the call. Oh, that's funny. Sorry, Tony. Yeah, it's that national park. Tony, you're gonna have to help me with the name of it. And anyway, I'm so embarrassed.
Sorry.
Did you actually see the website?
Some of us are locked down in 5K zones that don't have such natural beauty, and I'm just desperate to get out. Yeah.
Bradfield, we have a few special things.
Yeah,
oh my gosh, that's funny. What I was trying to show you is the donate button. Apart from anything else, we do need funding. We've had some fantastic people give as much as a 5K figure, and then $50. Anything that that you feel comfortable giving, and if it's on a monthly basis, that's super helpful too, because Stuart there has been organising the t-shirts. You might be able to see his chest. Can you show us your manly chest, Stuart? There he is. We've been Gillian's been doing leafleting along with Stuart, and there's just stuff we need to pay for, which is, it's only a small part of what we do. Basically what we're here for is to build community and to find out what people are concerned by, and then we have had a number of applications for candidates, and that process is still open. So if you know people who you think would fit the bill along the lines of what Helen was describing, we would love to hear from you or from them. Yeah. Anything else? Would Helen and Craig like to have the last word to wrap up the evening?
All I want to say is congratulations. Congratulations on being involved in your democracy. Even, you know, to sit here and be involved, to sit here and listen to us rabbit on is fascinating. And the fact that so many of you are willing to do that on your Monday night, on your, you know, public holiday, congratulations. That is a really important part. And yes, and the question that just came through, yes, it'll be on ABC soon as well. Sorry, go Helen.
And I'm with Craig on this. Can I say good on you, everyone who's on this line. Thank you for getting together, for having these conversations, for getting involved with your democracy, for getting to know each other, for having the energy to say, you know what, I don't have to just accept things as they are. I can move the dial, and I can do it with a whole bunch of other people as well, and I can be inclusive and respectful, and I can watch a film like Craig's. And Craig, I want to say that how delightful it was to meet you that day at the Oxley Hall, where there was a whole bunch of people from my electorate doing some really good work. It gave us courage, more courage, to know that other people have watched what we've done and want a little bit of the same. And we've got a long way to go right across the nation, I think, to get the kind of policies that we want to see for Australia. But I'm really optimistic, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity to meet so many of you tonight. Thank you, Sam, and thank you, your team.
Thank you both. Really can't thank you enough. And stay well, everybody. We'll see you when we're all free and championing our candidate.
Picnic day.
Picnic day. There's a picnic day coming up. Yes, go to our website. Thank you, Craig. Thank you, Helen.
Thanks,
Have a
guys.
great night.
Cheers.
Bye for now.
Bye.